So the first thing that we're going to do with JavaScript is we are going to make the panels show and hide itself on screen. So we have to gain access to the elements. We have our element here. We have this div, we have this paragraph, and we have a button. So these are all things that we want to gain access to. Now, the script is at the end of the document, so it's after the content of the document, but before close body and close HTML. We want the script at the end so that it's after the markup elements have been loaded into memory so that JavaScript will then have access to them. If the JavaScript tries to access something before that element is loaded into memory, it's not going to succeed and it will fail. It will either generate an error or just not work. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to create a variable reference to this panel on screen. So I can use let. And now the name I use for my variable, I have lots of options. If I have multiple elements on screen, I may want to then use the name that I'm going to be that I have up here because I'm going to access this through its ID. So I will say let main panel be equal to document.query selector. And then I need to reference that using the same kind of syntax that I use when I'm writing my CSS. So IDs, I use the pounder hashtag in front of it, like this. So now I have a variable reference to this DOM element, to this item with this ID on it, called main panel. Now, what I could do to verify that this is working before I grab the button or do anything else is I can just simply say main panel dot class name. And currently, main panel doesn't even have a class on it, so now I'm going to be assigning the class name, and we're going to see this happen. And we're going to, before I hit save and refresh the page, I'm going to go into the browser so we can see what it looks like without it, and then we'll go back, hit save, and see how it did make that change. So now I'm going to assign a class, and I'll just say display none. You will notice I use single quotes here, I use double quotes here. I did not put semicolons at the end of my lines. I can put semicolons at the end of the lines if that makes me happier doing so. I'm not in a semicolon mood tonight. If I'm using single or double quotes, doesn't really matter, so I can go back and forth between them. Well, notice that here I just referenced the name of the class. I don't have to use the CSS naming where I'd say dot display name. We only use that when we are using query selector and saying, hey, I want this element of my page. So now, if I look here, I will see where main panel does not have a class assigned onto it. Now if I go here and save, so the page has now been saved. Go back. All right, so now I restarted the server, and it's hidden. We can see now display none is working. We verified that it's now working. You do have to have your server running for it to work. OK, so now I don't need that there. Just going to save this, go back. Now we can see it's back because I don't want to do that just yet. Now what I want to do is I want to gain access to the button. The button has an ID of ShowHide on it. So I will just use that as well as equal to document.query selector. And now, again, because I'm grabbing it through an ID, I use the hashtag and then ShowHide. So now I have access to my button. Then what we need to do is we need to tell ShowHide to add an event listener. And the event we want to listen for is click And then when we hear that click happen on this button, we want to call a function. So we're going to call some instructions here. So we're going to write out that function in a moment. And the function, I'm going to just call it change class, and then we type in the word false. So don't worry about having to put in the comma false at the end. Just accept that that's part of the syntax that we have to work with. There's no coding that we're going to do where we're using event listeners that we will use true instead of false. It has to do with the bubbling of the event. So what that means is when I click on something on screen, what is registering that is I want this button to register it, but I don't want any objects below it. So if this button is sitting as part of a div, that div is that parent. That parent, if it's now on top of something else or it's on top of my main body, that event can bubble through each of those items. None of the event interaction we're going to code requires any type of bubbling as part of our events, where we start kind of working our way through the different object hierarchy. Instead, we just want the object that registered the event to grab it and to be done with it. So that's why we use false. So again, that's way more technical than we needed to go. Just accept it's false and move on. With our event listener in place, now we are going to call a function. And the function we are going to call, we use the keyword function, and we have designated it's going to be change class. Throw a couple parentheses and then throw a curly brace. The nice part when you are using a proper code editor is that it will put in the closing parenthesis and it will put in the closing curly brace for you, which does solve a lot of errors in people's coding. If you're working with just a straight text editor, it doesn't put that in, and then it's going to be a lot messier for you. So now this is where I want to say main panel dot class name is going to be equal to, and this is where I will designate my class name of display none. So what this means is when I click on this button, it's going to register that event. It's going to call the function change class. The function change class is then going to change the class name, or in this case add a class because there was no class on the object to begin with, and give it a class of display none. So when I save this, go back into my browser, I can see main panel, there's no class on it. When I click on this button, it goes away, and I can see display none has been attached to it. Now, if I'm clicking on the button more, nothing happens. So that's where now we need to figure out how can we make it that if I click on the button, it goes away, but if I click on the button when it's away, it brings it back. To get it so that the button becomes a toggling button, we need to use a conditional. So when we use a conditional, we use the word if. We have something occurring in parentheses. So if whatever is occurring in parentheses is true, then we're going to do something else. We're going to do something else. So if something is true. So if my main panel's class name is display none, so I'm just going to cut that out of there. I'll paste that in here. But now, when we are not assigning a value, so when we assign a value, we use a single equal sign. If we are asking, does equality exist, we can use either 2 or 3 equal signs. We'll go into more of that difference later. Right now, we're going to just go with 2. 2 is considered the less. This says, are these two things the same? So if this is true, then that's going to happen. So this says if main panel's class name is equal to display none. So if that is true, that is what we are asking. So if the class name of main panel is indeed display none, so if that is true, then we want to say main panel class name is going to be equal to, now a single equal sign this time, display block. every time Adam is code hinting for you, you can either hit tab or return to accept what it's giving you. If you don't like what's there and you don't want it to code hint, you hit escape. Otherwise, you can just keep on typing until you type the whole thing in. I do recommend you take advantage of the code hinting because it cuts down on typos and it allows you to use more verbose naming of your variables, which makes your code more human readable. So notice I did not type main P, I just typed MAI, and then I saw if I type P, I'm getting close enough. Now I can hit return. Main panel, now CLN, that gives me class name, because that's the highlighted version, so I'll hit that. We'll set that equal to display none. So if main panel's class name is not equal to display none, then we're going to set it equal to display none. But if its class name is equal to display none, meaning we've already made it disappear, then we set it equal to display block. So going back into the example, click the button. So we can see how now it says display none. So if I refresh the page, main panel doesn't have a class on it. So if there is no class on main panel, that means its class name isn't display none. It doesn't have a class. So we set its class name equal to display none. The next time I click on the button, main panel's class name is display none. So now we set it equal to display block. The third time I click on the button, its class name is not display none because it is display block. So then it becomes display none. So that's how we create this toggling situation without having to kind of pre-prep anything else. I can just keep clicking like that. So in this next component that is going to be factoring in for making the MadLibs, we want to be able to change the text. When I push the button, I want to change the text that is present. So to do this, it's going to be the same kind of thing that we did before. So I need to gain access to my items, but this time I'm not gaining access to main panel. Instead, what I want to gain access to is my paragraph. So that paragraph has a name of first P. So I'm just going to reference that. Now we will see it's a class. So this is going to be a little bit different. So we use a different naming as part of it for grabbing it. And again, it's the document.query selector. And this time my selector is going to be first P. So I'm grabbing it. Now technically what would happen is if I did have multiple elements that all had the same class on them, if I use query selector to access them by their class, then it's going to be affecting everything. So then that could be problematic in this case that we only have one paragraph, so we're good. Now I need to access my button. So this is going to be, my button has an ID of change text. So I'll let my variable be called change text. My document query selector, this time again with the hashtag because it's an ID. Change text. And now we need to tell change text to add event listener. And again, the listener we're doing is a click. And I'm going to create a function. I'll call it modify text. And then again, we use false. Now we get to define that function. Well, need the name, change text, or modify text, sorry. So function name, 2 parentheses, and a couple curly braces. So now we're in good shape. With this, we are going to create a variable to hold a new text string. I'll just call this my new text. And now this can be whatever you want it to say. So I'm just going to say, now we are cooking with gas. And finally, I'll say first p.text content. Now the C is capitalized, so text and then content, it's camel case, the C is capitalized, will be set equal to my new text. So I gain access to the paragraph, gain access to the button. Set an event listener on the button. When I click on that button, it is now going to replace the text with this new text. To test it out, go back to our page. And we can see that it worked. So on phase 3 here, we need to first add in our script. So I'll just go down, type in script, puts it in. If I hit tab twice, it's now ready to start putting it into my document. So the first thing that we need to do is gain access to our different objects on screen. So I'm going to go grab my form name so we can see right here. Now I could use an ID, could use a class. In this case, I have a class on it. Probably want to switch everything over to IDs just for consistency. But now it's document, query, selector. And I'm going to be grabbing dot form name. So using our CSS style naming convention. So I grab access to that form field there. I'm going to want to grab access to my paragraph that is holding my answer. So document, query, selector. And again, that is a class, so it's dot answer as part of it. So that's two of the things that we are working with here. So that gives me access to my input field. That gives me access to my answer, because when the user types into this input field, we need to now know that so we can gain access to it. We're also going to need access to our button. So our button has an ID of form stuff, so I'll just use that as my name. Document, query, selector, hashtag, form stuff. Now form stuff is going to need an event listener. And again, it will be a click. And with this, I am going to call a function that I will write, and I'll call it process form. And then false for bubbling. Function process form. Two parentheses, a couple curly braces, hit return. So now we're in pretty good shape. We're off to a good start. We still have a few more things that we need to gain access to, but we are getting there. Now, once I do have access to the answer, I'm just going to go back up here a couple lines to put it in so it's next to it. So with the answer, I'm going to say answer dot class name is going to be equal to, in this case I will say display none, because I don't want to see it in the beginning. So feel free to add in extra returns as necessary so you can kind of space things out to make your code more readable. There's no reason you have to just pack all your lines tight in there as part of it. see that everything is running, I'm just going to save this. Quick jump over here to my page, and we can see that that answer field has now disappeared. Our function doesn't do anything, so we do have to take care of that. Do notice that inside our input, we have a class on it. We can put an ID on it. We can have names. We can have default values we assign to form fields so that if the user doesn't provide a value, we have a default value. Otherwise, it just ends up being blank. And then placeholder, this is the gray text that shows up in the form field that's there until you start entering text into that element. It's never a good idea from a usability standpoint when you have an input form to rely only on that placeholder text to tell you what to put into it, because once someone starts typing, if they get partway through, then they're like, wait a second, what is this field for again? Oh shoot, I have to delete what I was typing to go and see it. So there should always be a label or something next to the form field telling us what goes into it, in addition to using the placeholder by it as well. Now that we have so form name is kind of, anytime we're putting a name on an input field to accept a name, it always seems, whatever variable name we use, it always feels kind of wrong because it has the word name in it. So then it seems like it's the name property instead, where it says form name. Well, that's the name from the form, so it's just kind of an awkward variable name. But it's descriptive, it just feels a little bit awkward there. So what I want to do is I want to bring my answer back. So answer's class name, we'll set it equal to display block. Then we're going to use a variable to hold a reference to the input from that form. And we're grabbing the text of it. So whatever the person filled out in the form, that is what is contained in the value of that object. So form name text, we'll set it equal to the value of whatever that form is. So if they typed in ABC, it would be ABC. So that's now grabbing that value. Now, what I'm going to do next is not something where we have to do it, and there's some redundancy in the code here. We could be much more efficient, but I'm being very verbose in the code to try and make it a little bit more understandable as to what's happening. In the process, we have a few extra variables. It's not the leanest or shortest code we could write, but I think it makes it a little bit clearer as to what's happening. So now we're going to take answer. Answer is that paragraph that we made go away, and we're going to set its text content. I'm going to set the text content equal to, inside quotes I will say welcome, comma, put a space, and then my closing quote. And I put that space there because now on the next line I'm going to say answer, text content. This time I'm going to use a plus with my equal sign. So I'm going to say I want to take whatever the text content currently is and add this other thing to it. Another thing I want to add to it is my form name text. So that text from that input field. Then I'm going to say answer text content plus equals period space, are we friends? So I'm adding to it each time. Now, could I do this all on one line? Yeah. I could have, when I use query selector under the form element, I could even say dot value right here. So I could say dot value right there and just grab its value right there. Then I could just grab or apply that. I don't need this extra variable that I'm using. And I could say the text content is equal to this plus this plus this plus, and I can do that. The problem is, let's say I have 10 form fields and I have multiple sentences that are going between each one. What's going to happen is it's going to get really long, and in the process of doing so, there's a certain magic quantity at which point it breaks. But if we just do it in small pieces like this, now these are really small pieces, but a little bigger pieces. But if we do it in small pieces, then it works better, and it does. I'm going to save that, pop over into my browser, and type in a name, click the button, and we'll see, welcome, Fred. Are we friends? Now I can go and type a different name in. The button again, and we can see it works.